He built an empire on fear. She offered him something he forgot existed, kindness, and it nearly got them both killed. If you've made it this far, don't you dare look away. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next inside that restaurant will change everything. The rain came down like it had a grudge. Not the polite kind of October rain that taps at windows and makes people reach for sweaters. This was the other kind, sideways and mean, driven by wind that cut through wool coats and found the skin underneath. The kind of rain that made Chicago feel like a punishment. It pooled in the potholes along North Michigan Avenue and swallowed the reflections of headlights whole, and it soaked through the collar of Damian Moretti's jacket before he'd walked half a block from where his driver had dropped him. He'd told Marco to park it and go home. Marco had looked at him in the rearview mirror the way loyal men look at their bosses when they know an argument is pointless, but are still compelled to register it, that brief, tightened jaw, that small exhale through the nose. "Boss?" I said go. Marco went. Damian walked. He was wearing a charcoal jacket he'd bought off the rack at a department store 6 weeks ago for exactly this purpose. His birthday dinner, the one night a year he allowed himself the absurd fantasy of being no one. No armored SUVs, no earpieces, no men who carried weapons on his behalf. Just Damian Moretti, 40 years old today, walking through the rain on Michigan Avenue like a man who paid taxes and worried about his cholesterol and didn't have 17 people on payroll whose primary function was to keep him breathing. The fantasy was wearing thin by the time he reached Carver House. He'd read about it in a magazine his accountant kept in the waiting room, one of those glossy publications that treated expensive food the way some people treated religion, with photographs of plates that looked like architecture and breathless descriptions of seasonal ingredients. Carver House had received its 3rd Michelin star the previous spring. The article called it the finest American steakhouse experience in the Midwest, and then proceeded to use the word transcendent to describe a piece of beef, which Damian found both ridiculous and strangely appealing. He'd called ahead. Made a reservation under a false name. David Morse. The way he always did when he didn't want the restaurant adjusting its posture around him. He'd been doing it for years. The moment people knew who you were, they stopped being themselves. The sommelier started recommending the most expensive bottles. The chef sent extra courses. The manager hovered. Everyone performed. Damian was tired of performance. He pushed through the brass-handled doors, and the warmth of the restaurant hit him immediately. That specific warmth of well-maintained spaces, of old money and good wood, and the faint smoke of the open-fire grills they advertised in the lobby. The entrance was all dark walnut paneling and amber lighting, and a hostess stand behind which stood a man whose job appeared to consist of making other people feel inadequate about their appearance. He was mid-50s, silver-haired, built for the position the way some men are built for golf or disappointing their children. His name tag read, Gerald. Gerald wore a perfectly fitted black suit and the expression of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of condescension as a hospitality service. Gerald looked at Damian. Damian looked at Gerald. 2 seconds passed in which the entire dynamic between them was silently established and quietly decided. "Good evening," Gerald said in the tone of a man who had not yet decided whether it was. "I have a reservation. David Morse. 8 o'clock. Gerald's eyes traveled from the rain-dark jacket to the simple watch on Damian's wrist, not because he needed to, but because the looking was itself the point. He turned to his leather-bound reservation book with the deliberate slowness of a man who understood that time, in this lobby, was a tool he wielded. "Morse," Gerald said, and the way he said it suggested the name itself was slightly disappointing. "I'm not finding that reservation. I called 4 days ago. I'm sure you believe that." Something moved in Damian's chest. It was very small and very quiet, and people who knew him well would have recognized it as the particular stillness that preceded violence the way a drop in barometric pressure precedes a storm. His right hand hanging at his side went completely still. "Run it again," Damian said. "Sir." Gerald set down his pen with the care of a man placing a period at the end of a sentence. "As you can see, we are at full capacity this evening. We do have a bar area available for guests without confirmed reservations where you'd be more than welcome to. I have a confirmed reservation. What I can tell you is that I have no record of it. Behind Damian, the lobby had acquired witnesses. A couple in their 60s who had the particular posture of people who were used to having their coats taken immediately. A younger pair near the coat check, the woman already glancing sideways, the way people do when they've decided something uncomfortable is about to happen, and they're figuring out whether to be entertained or appalled. A man in a suit near the corner checking his phone, not looking, but listening. Gerald straightened his already straight jacket. "Perhaps you'd like to try..." "Gerald." The single word came out very flat and very quiet, and it had the effect of a door closing in a silent room. Gerald blinked. Damian stepped forward once, closing the distance between them to something that would have felt intimate if it hadn't felt like the opposite. He kept his voice at conversational volume because he didn't need volume. He'd learned that lesson before he was 20 years old, from a man named Vincent Caruso who could clear a room with a whisper. "I have a reservation. It was made 4 days ago by phone. The name is David Morse. If your system lost it, that is a failure of your system, not a reflection of the existence of my reservation. And what I'm telling you now, very calmly, is that you're going to find me a table." Gerald held his ground with the particular courage of a man who had never genuinely needed courage. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but without a confirmed reservation in our system, I'm simply not in a position..." "Then let me speak to your manager." "I am the floor manager." "Then let me speak to someone who runs things when you're not performing." A small flush climbed Gerald's neck above his collar. His jaw shifted. He was marshalling something. A response, a dismissal, a polished version of the same message delivered with enough gloss to make it stick without leaving a mark. He didn't get the chance to deliver it. "Oh, there you are." The voice came from behind Damian and to the left, and it was warm and slightly out of breath, and carried the specific energy of someone who had been moving through the rain with a child on their hip and a bag on their shoulder, and was now arriving approximately 3 minutes later than they'd planned. He turned. She was maybe 32, 33, with dark hair that the rain had done its honest work on, strands of it plastered to her cheek and neck, the rest of it caught in something between a bun and its own structural collapse. She wore a gray wool coat that was one season past its best, and shoes that were practical rather than elegant, and she had a child pressed against her left side, a boy of about 7 who was clutching a drawing, something in crayon, folded twice, with the focused grip of someone protecting a document. She was not what Carver House was built for. She walked through its lobby like it hadn't gotten the memo. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she said, directing this at Gerald with the ease of someone who had spent years managing difficult situations through sheer forward momentum. "The cab took forever, and the rain..." She looked at Damian with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not recognition, not confusion, something more purposeful than both. "You should have waited inside." Damian looked at her. She looked back at him with a very slight widening of the eyes that managed to communicate, in the compressed language of human faces under pressure. "Please go with this." He had spent 30 years reading rooms, calculating angles, identifying exits, threats, structural advantages. He processed what she was doing in approximately 1 second. "I was just getting here myself," he said. Gerald's gaze moved between them. The woman shifted the boy on her hip, extended a hand to Gerald, and said, "Winslow, Harper Winslow. Party of 2, 8:15. She paused. "3, party of 3. Gerald checked his book. The expression that moved across his face was the particular expression of a man who has lost a small battle and intends to spend the next several hours pretending he didn't notice. "Of course, Miss Winslow, your table is ready." He looked at Damian once more. A look that reassessed and recalculated and arrived at the same conclusion men like Gerald always arrived at about men like Damian, which was the wrong one. "Right this way, Maruachas." The table was in a corner near the far window, and it was a good table. The kind of corner table that restaurants reserve for people they want to make feel important without giving up the best seats, which went to the regulars. The window looked out onto the rain-slicked street, where the lights of passing cars left long yellow signatures on the wet pavement. Harper Winslow settled her son into the chair across from her and dropped her bag onto the empty 4th seat and then sat down herself. And for a moment she simply breathed. the particular breathing of a person who has been in motion for too long and has just been given permission to stop. Damian sat. He looked at her. She looked at the menu she'd picked up the moment she sat down, with the focus of someone who intended to avoid a conversation until she'd decided what kind of conversation to have. The boy was looking at Damian. "Are you a stranger?" the boy asked. "Eli," Harper said, without looking up from the menu. "Mom says I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." "You're not," Damian said. "And yes." Eli considered this. He was a dark-eyed kid with rain-wet hair and a gap between his two front teeth and the thoughtful expression of someone who processed things at their own pace and arrived at their own conclusions. "Then why are you at our table?" "Eli." Harper set the menu down. "It's a fair question," Damian said. She looked at him then, and he got his first clear look at her face, tired around the eyes in the way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with duration, the kind of tired that builds up over months of being the only person in a room who knows all the facts. Her eyes were a sharp, ordinary brown. There was nothing careful in them. Most people looked at Damian and went careful. She just looked at him. "You seemed like you were about to do something very stupid," she said, "and I figured one of us should make a different decision. I wasn't going to do anything." "Your hand was." He looked down at his right hand, which was resting on the white tablecloth, and he couldn't quite argue with her. She turned back to the menu. "You don't have to stay. I'll tell them you got a call and had to leave." "I have a reservation," he said. "Apparently I don't, but I did. And I haven't eaten." She glanced at him over the top of the menu. "Then stay, but you're paying for yourself." "Obviously. And don't be weird about it." "About what?" "About any of it. We're just people who ran into each other and ended up sharing a table because the alternative was that man out there continuing to be the way he is." Damian looked toward the entrance where Gerald had resumed his post with the bearing of a man who had not been diminished and was committed to proving it. "Gerald?" Damian said. "Is that his name?" "It's on his badge." She smiled very briefly, and it changed the whole shape of her face. "Yeah, well, Gerald can eat somewhere else." She went back to the menu. Eli was still looking at Damian. He unfolded his crayon drawing and smoothed it on the table. It was a cake, rendered in enthusiastic purple and yellow, with an architectural number of candles. "Today is Mommy's birthday," Eli said. "Eli!" "It is." Harper set the menu down again with the patient suffering of a woman who had lost this particular battle before. "It is. You don't have to acknowledge that." "Happy birthday," Damian said. "Thanks." She picked the menu back up. "You don't need to make it into a thing." "I wasn't going to." "Good." There was a pause. The sommelier appeared at Damian's elbow, delivering the kind of smile that cost restaurants training dollars. Damian ordered a bourbon without looking at the list. Harper asked what the Malbec was like, and then ordered a glass of water for Eli, who was examining the breadbasket with the focused attention of someone who'd been told they could have one piece. When the sommelier left, she looked at him again. "What were you going to do? Back there?" "Nothing." "That's not what your face said." "My face," Damian said, "was just getting wet." She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but adjacent to one. "You don't have to tell me. I'm not asking to know your business. I've seen that look before, and it generally ends with everyone's evening getting worse. I've got a handle on my evenings." "Of course you do." She paused. "What do you do?" "Logistics," he said. "Distribution." "That's vague." "It's accurate. Most people in logistics don't get looked at the way that man out there was looking at you." Damian picked up his bourbon when it arrived, looked at the glass rather than at her. "Most people in logistics don't eat alone on their birthday." He didn't know why he said it. The sentence came out before he'd examined it, and by then it was already in the air between them, too late to pull back. She was quiet for a moment. "It's your birthday too?" "Yeah." Another silence. Eli had selected his bread roll and was tearing it into pieces with surgical precision. "October 14th, she said. "October 14th, he said. She leaned back in her chair and looked at him with an expression that was half assessment and half something he couldn't name. Well, this is either a very strange coincidence or the world has a sense of humor. I've never believed in coincidence, Damian said. No? What do you believe in? Cause and effect, he said. Everything that happens has a reason it happened. That's either very wise or very bleak, depending on what kind of day you're having. What kind of day are you having? She considered it with the genuine seriousness of a woman who didn't give flippant answers. Medium, she said finally. Better than this morning, worse than I planned this to be. She glanced at Eli, who was now arranging his bread pieces by size. But he's here, so that raises the average. Damian looked at the boy. Eli sensed it and looked back at him. Do you have kids? Eli asked. No, Damian said. Why not? Eli, Harper said. It's a reasonable question, Damian said, which made her mouth compress in the way mouths do when people are trying not to smile at the wrong moment. He didn't answer Eli's question because there was no version of the answer he could give at a dinner table in a restaurant to a child he'd known for 12 minutes. The truth was that the life Damian Moretti had built and chosen and defended was precisely not the kind of life you brought children into. He'd understood that at 23, and he'd been right at 23, and nothing in the 17 years since had given him reason to revise it. He didn't say any of that. He reached across and handed Eli the breadbasket so the kid could choose a second roll, and the look Eli gave him was the pure, uncomplicated gratitude of a child who'd been told he could only have one thing and had just been quietly given a second option. Harper watched this. She didn't say anything. The dinner arrived in careful courses, and the conversation moved the way conversations do when two people are simultaneously being careful and genuinely interested, which creates its own particular rhythm. Questions answered slightly sideways, observations made that are technically about something else. He learned that she ran a bakery on the north side, a neighborhood place that had been there for 11 years, and that her employer was currently in the process of deciding whether to sell the building to a developer, which would end the bakery, which would end her job, which was currently the primary structural fact of her financial life. She'd been managing the place for 6 years. The owner was a retired woman named Carla, who liked Harper but liked the developer's number more. She learned that he worked in distribution, that he'd been in Chicago his whole life, that he'd grown up on the South Side in a neighborhood she'd recognize, but that bore very little resemblance now to how it had been then. He didn't tell her how it had been, or what had shaped him there, or what he'd become as a result. She didn't press. She had, he noticed, the particular skill of people who are genuinely comfortable with silence, who could sit inside a pause and not feel compelled to fill it, who listened when he spoke rather than preparing their next sentence. Eli fell asleep somewhere between the entrees and dessert, curled in his chair with his crayon drawing of the birthday cake pressed under his cheek like a pillow, and the table went quieter, and the quality of the quiet changed. "Tell me something true," she said. It surprised him. "What?" "Something true. We're sitting here being polite at each other, and it's your birthday and mine, and the least we could do is say something real." She picked up her wine glass. "I'll go first if you want." He waited. "I hate this restaurant," she said. "It was Eli's idea. He found it in a magazine at the dentist's office, and he said it looked like the kind of place people go when something important happens, and he wanted tonight to be—" She stopped, looked at her glass. "He's been worried about me. He's 7, and he's worried about me, and I find that both very touching and very depressing." "What's he worried about?" "Everything I'm not telling him. Kids know. You can keep the specifics from them, but they can feel the shape of the thing." She set down her glass. "Your turn." Damian looked across the table at this woman he'd known for less than 2 hours, this stranger who had pulled him out of the trajectory of a very bad decision with the audacity of someone who simply didn't know what he was capable of, and he thought about what truth he might offer that was both honest and survivable. "This is the first time in 4 years," he said, "that I've sat at a table without someone watching the door." She looked at him. "People in logistics," she said slowly, "generally don't need someone watching the door." "No," he said. "They don't." She was quiet for a moment, and he watched her adjust her understanding of him without asking any of the questions the adjustment raised. "That restraint," The careful intelligence of it was the most attractive thing he'd seen in a very long time. "You told me the truth," she said, "a version of it. It's more than most people give." She looked at Eli sleeping in his chair. "Thank you for—" She nodded toward the breadbasket. "He's been told no a lot lately, not because I want to, just because—" "I know," Damian said. "You don't have to. I know." She nodded once, the way people nod when they've accepted something without wanting to make a moment of it. He picked up his bourbon. She picked up her wine. Outside, the rain had softened to something more negotiable, the city's lights running in the wet glass of the window. They sat in the comfortable silence of two people who had stopped performing and had found it wasn't as dangerous as they'd expected. He saw them at 9:47. His table faced the main dining room, and he'd been positioned that way deliberately. Old habit, muscle memory from 20 years of eating in spaces where threats could arrive from any direction, and his body never fully let him forget it, even on the nights his mind gave itself permission to try. 3 men. They came in through the front entrance at 90-second intervals, dressed in civilian clothes, each arriving independently, each declining the host's attention, and drifting toward different anchor positions. One near the bar, one near the interior partition wall, one moving toward the rear of the dining room under the pretext of finding a seat. Damian recognized the formation in the same instant he recognized the men weren't here to eat. His entire nervous system shifted registers, the warmth of the bourbon, the ease of the table, the particular comfort of the last 2 hours. All of it telescoped down to a point, and what expanded in its place was something cold and very fast and very old. He kept his face completely still. He'd spent 30 years keeping his face still in moments that mattered. The man near the bar caught the eye of the man near the partition for exactly half a second, and then both of them looked away. And that half second told Damian everything he needed to know about who had sent them and why. Lucien Varga, his underboss, who had been in his orbit for 11 years, who ran the North Side operations with a precision Damian had built and then handed him, who had shaken his hand at the funeral of Vincent Caruso and said the things loyal men said. Lucien, who had apparently decided that 40 was a good round number for an ending. The third man, the one working toward the back of the room, had positioned himself with sightlines to the emergency exit and the kitchen passage. It was professional placement. Damian had used men who thought the same way, for the same reasons, in the other direction. He had perhaps 90 seconds. Maybe less. He looked at Harper, who was saying something about the crème brûlée she'd ordered, whether it was worth splitting or whether Eli might wake up and want some. And her face was open and unguarded in the way faces are when people feel safe, and the sight of it put a specific kind of cold weight in his chest. She didn't know. She had no idea that she was sitting inside a kill zone, and she was there because of him. He set his bourbon glass down. "Harper." Something in his voice caught her. She stopped talking. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to do it quickly and without asking questions." She looked at him. "In a moment, I'm going to drop my napkin," he said, in the quietest possible voice. "And when I lean down to pick it up, I need you to put your arms around Eli and get him as low in that chair as you can. Press your bodies toward the table. Keep your head below the seat line." Her face changed. "What? No questions. Are you hearing me?" She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has just understood that the version of a man they've been sitting with for 2 hours is not the only version, and that the other version has just arrived. Her jaw set. "Yes," she said. "Good." He glanced at Eli, who was still sleeping. "He's going to be scared. Keep him down." "I will." "Whatever happens, stay behind the table. Don't move toward the exits until I tell you." But she reached across and put her hand on Eli's shoulder without waking him, just laying it there, and her face was very pale and very steady in the amber light. "Damian," she said. He looked at her. "Whatever you are," she said quietly, "you better be enough of it." He picked up the napkin. He let it fall. And across the dining room, 3 men reached simultaneously beneath their jackets. And the night that had almost been something else became what it was always going to be. The first shot took out the chandelier above the bar. Crystal exploded in a cascade of light and sound, and the dining room of Carver House erupted into screaming. and Damian Moretti came up from below the table, already moving, already calculating, already the thing that birthday dinners and department store jackets and bourbon and honesty had briefly let him not be. He flipped the table. The marble top crashed forward, and Harper threw herself over Eli, and the tablecloth and the creme brulee and the birthday wine all went down together, and the gunfire was real and close, and the night was broken open, and there was nothing left of the quiet except the memory of it, and even that was going fast. He had 3 men and 1 room and a woman and a child and 0 time and everything to lose. He moved. The first man died in the kitchen. Damian put him down between the expediting station and the hotline, where the cooks had scattered and left their stations burning, and the air smelled of char and blood and someone's abandoned butter sauce going black in a pan. It wasn't clean. None of it was clean. There was a 6-inch chef's knife on the counter, and Damian had used what was available because the gun the man carried was holstered on his left side, and Damian had come in from the right, and there hadn't been time for anything that required more than one decision. He didn't stop to look at what he'd done. He never did. Behind him, through the swinging kitchen doors, the dining room was still in chaos, screaming that had peaked and was now collapsing into the lower, more dangerous register of people who had found corners and were keeping quiet and waiting to understand if the worst had already happened or was still coming. The chandelier fire had triggered a suppression system over the bar, and water was coming down in the section near the entrance, and somewhere in the main dining room a woman was crying, in the specific, sustained way of someone who had been physically injured and was processing it on a delay. Damian moved through the kitchen. Second man, the one who'd taken the partition position, had followed him in. He was younger than the first, maybe late 20s, and he moved with the competence of someone trained but not seasoned, someone who'd been in situations that called for violence without having been in violence itself enough times to know what it did to the body's response time. He came through the service entrance on the east side of the kitchen with his weapon up and his eyes covering too much space at once. That was the mistake. You cover too much space, you see everything except what matters. Damian came off the wall on his left side. The fight lasted 8 seconds and was nothing like the movies. It was noise and contact and the specific physical grammar of 2 men trying to end each other in a small space between industrial shelving units. And when it was over, Damian was bleeding from a cut above his left eyebrow where the gun barrel had caught him on a swing, and the second man was down and not getting up. He took the weapon, checked it, safety, magazine, chamber. Old habit, 30 seconds of procedure that his hands performed while his mind was already ahead of it, already calculating where the third man was and what he'd do when the first 2 didn't come back out. The third man was the one who worried him. The other 2 had been sent as the execution itself. The third was insurance, positioned at the rear with the emergency exit covered, which meant his job wasn't the primary kill, it was containment, prevent escape, which also meant he was the one most likely to have contingency orders and a phone line to whoever had sent them. Damian needed that phone. He moved back toward the dining room doors, staying low, using the stainless steel of the prep counters as cover. Through the small porthole window in the swinging door, he could see the main floor. Overturned chairs, a table on its side, the wreckage of several abandoned meals. Most of the patrons had gotten to the floor or clustered near the back wall. 2 waitstaff were against the far partition, one of them with her hand pressed to her forearm. He found Harper in the corner. She had Eli pulled completely beneath the overturned table, her body curved over his, and even from this angle through the smudged kitchen door window, Damian could see that she was doing exactly what he'd told her. Head down, body low, no movement. The boy was awake now, and Damian could see his mouth moving, asking something, and Harper's hand was pressed firm against the back of his head, in the way that was not comforting so much as structural, keeping him from lifting it. The third man was near the emergency exit at the back of the room. He wasn't moving toward the patrons. He was watching the kitchen door. Waiting. Damian backed away from the porthole, took 2 seconds to breathe, and thought it through. Third man's position gave him angles on the kitchen entrance, the main dining room floor, and the emergency exit. He had cover behind the hostess credenza they'd dragged into the back section. He was waiting because the silence from the kitchen told him something had gone wrong, and he was disciplined enough not to rush in to find out what. That discipline would keep him alive for exactly as long as Damian let it. Damian went around. There was a service corridor that ran parallel to the east dining room wall. He'd clocked it when they came in, old habit, the same reflex that had made him choose a corner table and position himself facing the room. He found the corridor access through a door marked Staff Only that opened off the kitchen passage, and he moved through it in the dark, staying close to the left wall, the borrowed weapon held low at his side. The corridor emerged through a panel door behind the mahogany credenza. He was 6 feet behind the third man when the man's phone lit up in his jacket pocket. The man answered it on the first vibration, kept his voice below the ambient noise of the room. The crying, the suppression system still running, the particular hum of a space that has been broken open and is waiting to understand what comes next. "It's done?" The voice on the other end was audible even from 6 feet. "Negative," the third man said. Kitchen went quiet. Nothing confirmed. A pause. Then, "Find him." "Understood." "What about the woman and the kid?" Another pause. Longer. "Protocol." The third man lowered the phone. Damian had heard the word and knew what it meant, and the cold that moved through him had nothing to do with the wet jacket or the cut above his eye still seeping into his eyebrow. Protocol. In Lucien Varga's operational language, the language Damian himself had once codified, protocol in a failed hit meant no witnesses. It meant the woman and the child who had been in the wrong seat in the wrong restaurant were not an oversight to be managed, but a problem to be resolved permanently. They were never meant to survive this. The realization arrived with the specific quality of information you already knew and refused to process until the moment made it unavoidable. He moved. The third man heard him a half-second before contact, turned, brought the weapon up, and Damian caught his wrist at the apex of the rays and drove it sideways and up, and the gun discharged once into the ceiling, and plaster came down in a white cascade, and the people on the floor in the dining room screamed again, that second wave of screaming, and then the fight was brief and decisive, and the third man went down and stayed down, and Damian had his phone. He stood over it for a moment, breathing. The dining room had gone to silence again, the specific silence of people deciding whether the thing was over. "Damian," Harper's voice, low, controlled. He turned. She'd come up from behind the overturned table, Eli pressed against her side, the boy's face buried in her coat with the focused intensity of a child who has decided that if he can't see the thing, it doesn't have the same power. Harper's coat had plaster dust on the shoulder. Her hair was entirely free of whatever arrangement it had managed at dinner. She looked at the man on the floor. She looked at Damian. She didn't scream. She didn't step back. She took one breath and said very quietly, "Are there more?" "Not in the building," he said. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Okay." She looked at Eli. "Okay, baby, we're going to walk now. Keep your eyes on my coat, all right? Just look at my coat." Eli nodded against her side. She looked back at Damian with eyes that had moved through shock and out the other side into something harder and more functional. The look of a woman who had decided to process the terror later and survive it now. "Where are we going?" she said. "With me." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." He looked at the emergency exit. "We go out the back, we move fast, and you don't let go of him." She looked at him for 3 seconds with an expression he couldn't entirely read, the compressed calculation of a person deciding in real time whether the danger in front of them was better or worse than the danger of the alternative. "Don't let anything happen to my son," she said. "No," Damian said. "I won't." She believed him, or chose to. Maybe those were the same thing. They went out the back into the rain. Tato. The safe house was a floor-through apartment above a dry cleaning business on North Paulina, one of 6 properties Damian maintained under corporate shells that didn't trace to him through fewer than 4 layers of paperwork. He used it twice a year for the kind of situations where the primary residence became impractical, which in his life was a category that included more contingencies than most people needed to plan for. Marco met them at the side entrance. He looked at the blood above Damian's eye, at Harper and Eli, at the expression on Damian's face, and he said nothing because he'd worked for Damian Moretti for 9 years and had learned with some precision which moments called for questions and which called for keys and silence. He handed over both. Inside, the apartment was clean and sparse, functional furniture, blackout curtains on every window, a kitchen stocked with the basics. Damian went to the bathroom and ran cold water over the cut, while Harper got Eli settled on the couch with a blanket from the closet and a glass of water, and the television turned to a cartoon channel at low volume, which was the childhood ritual of restoration that she had clearly deployed before in other emergencies. When she came into the kitchen doorway, Damian was pressing a folded dish towel against his eyebrow. She crossed the room, took the towel from his hand without asking, and looked at the cut with the clinical focus of someone who had done first aid before. "It needs a butterfly bandage, not stitches," she said. "Do you have a kit?" "Bathroom cabinet." She went and came back with it, and he sat on the kitchen counter while she cleaned the cut and applied the closure strips with the same matter-of-fact competence she seemed to bring to everything, and neither of them spoke until she'd finished and stepped back and looked at her own hands. "Tell me," she said. "Harper, don't." Her voice was flat and final. "Don't give me a version. Give me what it is. I left that restaurant with you because my son was in there and you were the only option available, and I am standing in a room I've never seen before with a man I didn't know 3 hours ago, and I need the facts." He looked at her. She looked back without flinching. He told her. Not everything. Not the full architecture of what he'd built over 20 years. Not the names and structures and operations that existed below the surface of the Moretti organization, like the deep roots of something that had grown too large to easily kill. But the shape of it, what he was, what tonight had been. Who had sent the men in the restaurant and why? And then the part he'd been sitting with since he'd heard it through the third man's phone. "You weren't a coincidence," he said. "The reservation. The promotion that gave you a table at Carver House." She had gone very still. "Eli won a contest," she said, 3 weeks ago. "A restaurant lottery. I thought it was a mailing list. It wasn't a contest." She processed that. He watched her do it. The sequence of it moving across her face, the moment it landed and what it did when it arrived. "My ex-husband," she said. "His name is Kyle Winslow." "Was. He left 18 months ago. He left because he owed money he couldn't pay, not to a bank." Damian kept his voice even, giving her the information the way you hand someone something heavy, carefully, making sure they're braced for it. "He borrowed from people who work for my organization. He took the money, and he disappeared, and he left you and Eli in a city where the people he owed knew where you lived." Harper set the first aid kit on the counter. "How much?" she said. 400,000. She didn't react to the number the way most people did. She absorbed it and moved past it. "And the men tonight were sent by my underboss, a man named Lucien Varga." He paused. "He chose your family. On purpose. You and Eli were used as cover, a reason to put civilians in that specific room at that specific time that would force me to be careful, slow my response, make the clean kill easier." "We were bait," Harper said. "Yes." She turned away, put both hands on the edge of the kitchen counter, and stood there for a moment, her back to him. And the room was so quiet he could hear the cartoon sounds from the other room and Eli's voice asking something in a small, sleepy register. He waited. She turned back around and her eyes were dry, and her jaw was set, and she looked exactly like what she was. A woman who was furious and frightened and was choosing which one to lead with. "What happens now?" she said. "Now I fix this." "That's not specific enough. Lucien Varga declared war on me tonight. I'm going to end it." "And us?" "You stay here. Marco will be outside. Nobody gets to you." "For how long?" "Until it's over." "And how long is that?" He didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer was that he didn't know. And with Harper Winslow, he had apparently lost his capacity for comfortable lies. "A few days," he said. "Maybe more." She looked at him for a long moment. "Eli has school." "I know. He has a dentist appointment on Thursday." "Harper, I'm telling you the facts of our life," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, just once, just briefly, and she pulled it back with the practiced control of someone who had cracked in private and learned to watch for the edges in public. "We have a life. It's small, and it's ours, and I have been keeping it together for 18 months without help. And I am not going to let some man I married at 26 who couldn't keep himself out of debt to criminals Blow it apart from whatever hole he crawled into. Damian said nothing. He's out there somewhere, she said. Kyle. Yes. Does he know what Varga did tonight, what they tried to do to Eli? The question was quiet and precise, and underneath it was something that was not quite hope and not quite the opposite of it. The specific emotional position of someone who needed to know whether the person who'd failed them was also a person who would have let them die. I don't know, Damian said. I'll find out. She nodded. She looked at the kitchen doorway, through which the cartoon sounds continued in their small, consistent loop. He asked me, she said, this morning, if we were going to be okay. What did you tell him? What I always tell him. She looked back at Damian. Yes. The words sat in the kitchen between them with all the weight of what it had cost her to keep saying it. Damian's phone, his real phone, not the third man's, vibrated on the counter where he'd set it. He looked at the screen. Marco, text. Varga's people are moving. North side crews pulling positions. It started. He put the phone in his pocket. Get some sleep, he said to Harper. I won't sleep. Try anyway. Tomorrow's going to be worse than tonight, and you'll need whatever you can get. She looked at him with the same assessment she'd used in the restaurant, that direct, undecorated reading of a person that had no performance in it. Are you going to come back? She said. When this is over. Are you the kind of man who comes back? The question stripped everything down to something he hadn't examined in a very long time. He thought about what he'd been for 20 years. The things he'd built and the things he'd broken and the spaces in his life that had stayed empty by design. I don't know, he said. I've never had a reason to before. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned toward the living room and her son. Damian picked up the third man's phone, the one with the call on it, the voice on the other end that had said protocol with the ease of someone ordering dinner, and he scrolled to the incoming call log. The number was local, prepaid almost certainly. But Lucien had a habit, one Damian had watched develop over 11 years, of being careful everywhere except the small things, the small operational details he trusted to other people, and other people under pressure made choices that left marks. He dialed Marco. I need the number traced, he said when Marco picked up, and I need Briggs. A pause. Briggs was the name of a man who existed at the edge of Damian's organization in the particular capacity of someone who solved problems that had no clean solution. A former federal investigator who'd crossed lines and found the other side profitable, and had worked for Damian for 4 years in the specific context of situations like this one. Briggs is going to want to know what he's walking into, Marco said. Tell him it's Lucien. Another pause, longer. How bad is it? What? Marco said. Damian thought about the word he'd heard through that phone. Protocol. He thought about a 7-year-old boy sleeping on a couch with a crayon birthday cake drawing under his cheek, and a mother who kept saying yes when the honest answer was that she didn't know. It's as bad as it gets, Damian said. Make the calls. He hung up. From the other room came the quiet sound of Harper's voice, low and steady, the particular cadence of a parent talking a child back from the edge of fear toward something manageable, not lying to him exactly, but choosing which truths to offer and in what order, which was its own kind of love. Damian stood in the kitchen with the phone in his hand and the rain still working at the window above the sink. He had 3 dead men in a restaurant kitchen. He had a war starting on the north side. He had a woman and a child in a safe house who were there because of a debt that wasn't theirs, and a husband who'd run, and a system that had decided their lives were acceptable collateral. And he had a number on a phone. He pulled up his contact for a woman named Reyes, Detective Sergeant Clara Reyes, Area 3, who existed in the particular relationship with Damian that some law enforcement relationships with organized crime took on over long years. Not corrupt, not clean, operating in the complicated space between those two things where most of the actual work got done. He'd never called her about something like this before. He called her now. It rang 4 times. Moretti, she said, without greeting. It's 10:30 at night. I need a favor. You need a favor? Her voice had the tone of someone sitting up in bed, already calculating. Does this favor involve the 3 dead men at Carver House that my phone has been lighting up about for the last 40 minutes? peripherally. Jesus, Damian. Clara, what do you need? I need the number that called a prepaid at 9:52 tonight traced as far as it goes. And I need it before morning. A long pause. The sound of her moving, of a chair, of the particular acoustic of a kitchen at night. If I do this, she said, I need to know it's not going to come back on my people. It won't. That's not specific enough. I have evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder, multiple targets, civilian casualties at a public restaurant. By the time this is over, you're going to have everything you need to close cases that have been open for 3 years. He paused. But I need tonight. Another silence. Send me the number, she said. He did. He put the phone away and stood in the quiet kitchen and thought about what was coming, the shape of it, the weight of it, the 4 days he already knew this would take, because he knew Lucien Varga's operational patterns the way you know the patterns of something you built yourself. The war had started. He hadn't started it, but he was going to be the one who finished it. In the other room, Harper had gone quiet, which meant Eli had finally gone back to sleep, which meant she was sitting in the dark with nothing between her and the facts of the night. And he knew exactly what that felt like because he had been sitting with facts in the dark his whole adult life, and it never got easier. You just got better at staying in the chair. He went to the living room doorway. She was on the couch next to Eli, her son's head in her lap, her hand resting on his shoulder. She looked up when Damian appeared in the doorway, and the question on her face wasn't about safety or next steps or the mechanics of the war he was about to prosecute. It was simpler than that. Did you eat? She said. At the restaurant, before everything. He almost laughed. He hadn't come close to laughing in so long the impulse felt foreign. No, he said. Not really. There's probably food in the kitchen. She nodded toward it. You should eat something. You're going to be up all night. He looked at her. This woman he'd known for 4 hours. This stranger who had saved him from himself in a lobby and then stayed standing when everything else fell apart. And he thought that of all the things anyone had said to him in the last 20 years, this small instruction, this completely ordinary concern, was the one that came closest to undoing him. Yeah, he said. Okay. He went back to the kitchen. He found bread and made a sandwich standing at the counter in the dark, and he ate it without tasting it. And his phone rang at 11:14 with Marco's voice tight and clipped on the other end, saying the words that meant the 4 days had just become 3, that Lucien had moved faster than expected, that 2 of Damian's north side operations had already gone dark. The war wasn't waiting. He set down the rest of the sandwich. He picked up his jacket. And somewhere in the city, in an office Damian knew, and a chair Damian had put him in, Lucien Varga was on his own phone making his own calls. And the number that Clara Reyes was tracing right now, the number Damian needed, was the thread that connected Varga's careful public life to the word he'd said through a stranger's phone to a room full of people he'd sentenced to, the number traced to a burner registered to a shell company called Aldgate Consulting, LLC. Aldgate Consulting had a registered address on West Monroe Street and a single filing with the Illinois Secretary of State dated 14 months ago. And it had never paid taxes or filed an operating report because it had never operated, not in any sense that involved a product or a service or a human being sitting at a desk doing work. It existed on paper for the single purpose of existing on paper, which was the kind of structure Damian recognized immediately because he had used the same architecture himself many times for the same reasons. Clara Reyes called him at 12:40 in the morning. Aldgate, she said, I see it. You know it? I know the structure, not the name. A pause. He could hear her moving through her own kitchen, the sound of a cabinet opening. There's a second layer. Aldgate has a registered agent, a law firm on LaSalle, Harwick and Associates. Damian was quiet. You know that name, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel Harwick, Damian said. He's been my attorney for 9 years. The silence on the line had a particular texture to it. The texture of a law enforcement officer who has just been handed something larger than she expected and is running the implications at speed. Damian, she said carefully, I hear you. If your attorney is the registered agent for the shell that funded the hit, I know what it means. It means he knew. It means he was part of the architecture before tonight. That's not... She stopped. How much does Harwick know about your operations? The question landed in his chest like something physical. Daniel Harwick had been Damian's attorney since Damian was 31 years old. He'd handled the legitimate structures, the real estate holdings, the LLCs, the trusts, the contracts that gave Damian's operation its public face. He knew the full map. Not just the surface, but the layers beneath it. Which properties moved money, which companies existed to serve which functions, which names were real, and which were constructed. He knew where everything was buried. Everything, Damian said. Another silence. I need to bring this to my lieutenant, Clara said. Not yet. Damian, 24 hours. I need 24 hours before this becomes official. I can't sit on a multiple homicide and a conspiracy. Clara. He kept his voice level. In 24 hours, you'll have more than 3 bodies at a steakhouse. You'll have the full operational map of what Lucien Varga has been building for the last 2 years. Names, accounts, properties, cases you've been trying to close for 3 years. He paused. Give me the day. The line was quiet for a long time. 18 hours, she said. Not 24. And Moretti. If anyone else gets hurt, nobody else gets hurt. He ended the call and stood in the kitchen of the safe house and let the full weight of what he now knew arrange itself into something he could look at directly. Daniel Harwick. Not Lucien alone. Lucien needed the shell company built before tonight. Weeks before. Maybe months before. He needed the structure in place before he moved. And he'd needed someone who understood Damian's legal architecture well enough to know how to build around it, through it, and eventually against it. Someone who'd been in the room for 9 years. Damian picked up his jacket and went out into the night. Marco drove without being asked. He'd learned over 9 years that certain nights called for driving and certain nights called for questions, and the way to tell the difference was the angle of Damian's shoulders and the specific quality of his silence. Tonight the silence had an edge to it that Marco had not heard before, and he drove. They went east, then south. And Damian spent the drive going through the geometry of the last 2 years, the patterns he'd seen without cataloging, the small frictions in the organization that he'd attributed to growth and stress, and the natural turbulence of managing something large and complex and illegal. Small things. The way certain information had moved slower than it should have. The times when an operation had encountered interference that he'd written off as coincidence. The police pressure on 2 of his Southside operations last spring that had come from nowhere and gone nowhere, contained, controlled, pointed specifically enough that he'd wondered briefly and then filed away. Not coincidence, not random. Architecture. Lucien had been building for at least 18 months, possibly longer, and Harwick had been providing the foundation, the legal and financial scaffolding that a coup of this size required before the violence could begin. You didn't move on a man like Damian Moretti with 3 gunmen and a prayer. You moved with preparation. You moved with the pieces already in position. The pieces had been in position for a very long time. Briggs, Damian said. Marco's eyes found the mirror. He's at the Pullman property, waiting. Take me there, Ujkichit. The Pullman property was a warehouse space in the far south side that Damian had acquired 7 years ago for storage and had retrofitted into a secondary operations center after the primary location on the west side had been compromised by a zoning investigation 3 years back. Briggs used it when he needed space and privacy and equipment, which were the 3 things his particular work always required. Raymond Briggs was 53, built like a man who had once been athletic, and had let the athleticism settle into something denser and more permanent. He had the face of a former federal investigator, which was a very specific kind of face, the kind that had spent years reading people's lies and had stopped entirely expecting honesty as a default condition. He wore the same gray fleece he always wore, and he had 3 laptops open on the workbench when Damian came in, and he looked up once and then back at his screens. Harwick, Damian said. Briggs stopped typing. You know. How long have you known? Briggs turned on his stool. He had the look of a man choosing between 2 versions of a conversation and settling on the harder one. I suspected for 6 weeks. I've had confirmed knowledge for 11 days. The stillness that moved through Damian was of a different quality than the one in the restaurant. That one had been reflexive, threat response, body ahead of the mind. This one was deliberate, chosen, the kind of stillness you had to consciously impose over something that wanted very badly to become something else. 11 days, Damian said. I was building the case. I needed the full picture before I brought it to you because a partial case against Harwick would have... 11 days, Damian said again, and the repetition was not a question. Briggs set his hands on his knees. Yes. 3 men came into a restaurant tonight and tried to kill me. A woman and her 7-year-old son were used as deliberate bait to put me in that room at that time, and you had 11 days. If I'd brought you half a case, you had 11 days, Raymond. The use of his first name landed the way Damian intended it to, not as intimacy, but as a removal of professional distance, a stripping away of the buffer that the last name provided. Briggs looked at him steadily. I was wrong, he said. I made a judgment that turned out to be wrong. I thought I had more time. What changed your mind? The restaurant. When I heard about the restaurant, I understood that whatever I thought the timeline was, Varga had moved it forward. He turned back to the screens. But I have it now. The full map. Show me. Briggs pulled up the first screen. It was a financial diagram. Accounts, transfers, LLC structures, rendered in the clean, emotionless format of forensic accounting. Varga started pulling resources 18 months ago, Briggs said. Small amounts at first, below the threshold that would flag in your monthly reviews. He used 3 separate structures to accumulate approximately $4 million over the first year. In the last 6 months, the pace increased. He had $17 million by last week. From my operations. From your operations. Running through accounts that Harwick managed on the legitimate side. He clicked to the second screen. Harwick wasn't just the registered agent on Aldgate. He's been running the transfer architecture. Every dollar Varga pulled went through at least one entity that Harwick touched. Damian looked at the diagram. He looked at it for a long time. Where's Harwick now? He said. Home. His condo on Erie Street. He hasn't moved since 8 tonight, which means either he doesn't know the hit failed, or he's waiting for confirmation from someone other than Varga. He'll run when he finds out. He'll run by morning, Briggs agreed. He has a passport under a second name. I found the application 14 months ago. He's been planning an exit for at least that long. Damian straightened up. There's more, Briggs said. The way he said it, the specific weight of those 2 words, made Damian go still again. Say it. Briggs pulled up the third screen. It was a communication log. Text messages, reconstructed from metadata and partial recovery. Briggs had the skills for this kind of work. It was why Damian paid him. The contact between Varga and Harwick goes back further than 18 months, Briggs said. I found messages from 3 years ago, before the current conspiracy. He highlighted a section of the log, the dates at the top. 3 years ago, January, February. That's the month before Vincent Caruso died, Damian said. Yes. Vincent Caruso had been Damian's predecessor, his mentor, the man who had handed him the organization at 68 and retired to a house in Scottsdale where he had died 6 months later of cardiac arrest. Sudden, confirmed by 2 doctors, mourned by the organization with appropriate solemnity. Damian had given the eulogy. He had meant every word of it. He looked at the message log. He didn't read the content of the messages because Briggs had highlighted the relevant section already, and the relevant section was a single exchange, a number he recognized as Harwick's, and a number he recognized as a burner Lucien had used in the early period of his underboss tenure, which Damian knew because he had personally audited Lucien's communication protocols in his first year. The exchange was dated 4 days before Vincent Caruso's cardiac arrest. It was not a long exchange. It said, everything in place, clean, and then the response, confirmed. Damian stood in the Southside warehouse at 1:30 in the morning with this information in front of him and felt something happen in his chest that had no clean name, not grief exactly, not rage exactly, something that was both of those things pressed together until they became a third thing that was heavier than either. Vincent Caruso had not died of a cardiac arrest. He had been killed. And Lucien Varga and Daniel Harwick had done it together, 3 years before they tried to do the same thing to Damian with the same partnership in a different form. He'd put Lucien in position. He'd trusted Harwick with everything. He'd given the men who murdered his mentor the tools to build the machine that had just tried to kill him. "The woman who was with me tonight," Damian said. His voice was flat and very controlled and far away from what was happening underneath it. "Harper Winslow." "I know about her," Briggs said carefully. "Her ex-husband, Kyle Winslow. Where is he?" Briggs's expression shifted in a way that was small and very significant. "That's the other part," he said. "Tell me." "Kyle Winslow hasn't been missing," Briggs said. "He's been in protective custody. Federal. He came to the FBI 8 months ago as an informant." Damian looked at him. "He was feeding them information about Varga's North Side operations," Briggs said. "Not about you directly. Winslow didn't have that level of access, but he knew enough about Varga's structure to be useful." He paused. "The gambling debt was real. The $400,000 was real, but he didn't disappear to hide from it. He went to the FBI because Varga's people made a threat that went beyond collecting the debt." "What threat?" Briggs looked at him steadily. "Harper and Eli, Varga's collectors, told Kyle Winslow that if he didn't produce the money in 60 days, they would make his family pay for it differently." The kitchen in the safe house. Harper's voice. "He left 18 months ago. The exhaustion in her face that had nothing to do with tonight and everything to do with the duration of carrying something she didn't know the shape of. She had been living for 18 months in a city where her ex-husband had abandoned her, not understanding that his disappearance was a form of compliance. The only compliance a man without $400,000 could offer to people who intended to collect it in flesh if he couldn't provide it in cash. Kyle Winslow had run to the FBI and left his wife and son in the city. He'd left them here. "Does the FBI know about tonight?" Damian said. "They know something happened at Carver House. They don't know the full scope yet." Briggs paused. "But Moretti, if Winslow is their informant and Varga just tried to move against you, the FBI is going to start connecting pieces very quickly. You have maybe 8 hours, Damian said. Maybe less." He turned away from the screens and walked to the far wall and stood with his back to the room for a moment. And the thing that had been building in his chest since he'd read those 2 lines on the communication log was still building, still pressing outward, and he managed it the way he managed everything, by staying completely still inside it until he could find the edges of it and work out where to put his weight. Vincent Caruso. He'd gone to Scottsdale for the funeral. He'd stood at the grave in the desert sun and felt the specific weight of inheriting something that was both legacy and responsibility, and had told himself he would honor it. He had honored the wrong things. He turned back around. "I need Varga's location," he said. "Not where his people think he is. Where he actually is right now, tonight." "He's been moving since 9 o'clock, Briggs said. "He's not at any of his known properties. I've been tracking his vehicle through traffic cameras, and I lost him 40 minutes ago near the riverfront." "He's going to the warehouse." "Which one?" "He has a space on the Calumet River, not in the organizational records. I found it 4 years ago, and I didn't tell him I'd found it because—" He stopped. "Because he'd been cataloging Lucien's private assets for 4 years out of an instinct he'd never consciously examined. The reflex of a man who knew that loyalty had a half-life and wanted to know where people kept their exits. Because I always knew this day might come." Briggs was looking at him. "He's going to have people there." "Yes." "You go to that warehouse tonight with the FBI starting to move and Varga already expecting you." "I'm not going tonight." "Then when?" Damian moved back to the workbench and looked at Briggs's screens. The financial maps, the communication logs, the evidence that had been building for months while he'd been running the organization that both men had been systematically hollowing out. "I need to go back to the safe house," he said. "There's something I have to do first." Shuts. Harper was awake. He'd known she would be. She was sitting in the kitchen of the safe house with both hands around a mug of coffee she'd made from the supplies in the cabinet, and the mug said Chicago on it in faded block letters, and she was looking at the middle distance the way people look when they're not seeing what's in front of them but working through something behind their eyes. She looked up when he came in. He sat across from her at the kitchen table. He told her about Kyle. Not everything at once. He gave it to her in the order that was least cruel, which was still cruel, because there was no arrangement of these particular facts that didn't land like something heavy. He told her Kyle was alive. He told her about the FBI. He told her that her husband hadn't simply abandoned them. He'd placed them in the city as an unacknowledged bargaining chip while he constructed a deal that was supposed to keep them safe, but it operated on the assumption that Varga's people would wait, that the process would move at the speed of federal investigations, that the clock he'd started by running had enough time left on it. The clock had run out tonight. She didn't cry. He'd expected her to, somewhere in the middle of it, but she didn't. Her jaw went tighter and her hands gripped the mug harder, and at one point she set it down very carefully on the table because he could see she didn't trust herself to keep holding it, but she didn't cry. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "He thought he was protecting us," she said, not defending Kyle, stating it, examining it, turning the fact over in her hands the way you turn over something you're not sure is what it appears to be. "That's one way to read it," Damian said. "What's the other way?" He took the option that was most available to him. She sat with that. "Which left us here." "Yes." She pressed both palms flat on the table. Her hands were strong. Baker's hands, he'd noticed over dinner, with the particular calluses of someone who worked with dough and heat and heavy equipment every day. "I want to talk to him," she said. "I know. Can you make that happen?" "Not yet. The FBI is going to want to keep him contained until—" "I don't care what the FBI wants." Her voice was steady and cold and very clear, the voice of a woman who had arrived at the outer edge of her patience with forces that claimed authority over her life. "He left Eli in this city. I want to look at him." "Harper." "I'm not asking for your opinion on it. I'm telling you what I want." She looked at him directly. "You told me you were going to fix this. That's what I'm asking you to fix. The rest of it, Varga, all of it, that's your war. Kyle is mine." He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I'll get you to him. After." She studied him for a moment, deciding whether to believe it. "You have a way of saying things that sounds like a promise but has an exit in it." "Not this time." The look she gave him was long and careful, and then she picked up her coffee mug again and turned it in her hands. "Tell me what you need from me," she said, "to get through the next part. Stay here. Keep Eli calm. Don't contact anyone." "There's no one to contact. My phone's at the restaurant." She looked at the window, at the rain that had finally gone to a fine mist against the glass. "Damian." "Yeah." "The man who did this." "Varga." She said the name with the flat attention of someone filing it away. "Is he going to know he failed? That we got out?" "He already knows. So he's going to try again." "He can't. His whole play was the restaurant, a clean operation with civilian cover that would make it impossible to trace back to him. Now 3 of his men are dead in a public place, and a federal investigation is about to open, and he's out of—" Damian stopped. He looked at the table, at the specific pattern of the wood grain, at the coffee mug ring Harper's mug had left on the surface. "What?" she said. He'd just understood something. He'd said it himself without tracking where it led. A federal investigation is about to open. Kyle Winslow was a federal informant. Varga had already known that. Damian had assumed, without examining the assumption, that Varga's move tonight had been about Damian, full stop. The coup. The power transfer. The elimination of the man in the seat. But Kyle Winslow's testimony could expose Varga's North Side operation in a way that Damian's death wouldn't fix. Kyle was already talking. The FBI already had 8 months of material. Varga's restaurant play had served 2 purposes: kill Damian and eliminate the only civilians who could connect Varga's people directly to the debt collection threats that had sent Kyle Winslow to the FBI in the first place. Harper and Eli were not just bait. They were the reason the timing had moved forward at all. Kyle Winslow had told the FBI about the threats against his family, which meant Harper and Eli were the human evidence that linked Varga's operation to the kind of criminal conduct that could put him away for decades. Without them, Kyle's testimony lost its most powerful element. Varga hadn't just targeted them to get to Damian. He targeted them because they were the linchpin of a federal case, which meant even with the restaurant operation destroyed, Even with 3 men dead and the timeline collapsed, Vargas still had every reason to reach them. Damian's phone buzzed. Marco. Text. 1 sentence. Safe house address has been burned. How? Don't know yet. Someone told someone. They're moving. The cold came back, different from before, more specific and more urgent. He looked up at Harper. She was already reading his face. She'd gotten very good at reading his face in a very short amount of time. We have to move, he said. Now? Right now. She was already standing, already turning toward the other room, already doing the calculation that mothers do. Eli's shoes, the blanket, the drawing he'd want to have, in the compressed time of someone who'd been told they had none. How did they find us? She said, not stopping, moving toward her son. Damian looked at the door and at the window and at the phone in his hand with Marco's text on the screen and thought about who had known the address of the Paulina safe house, and the number of people in that category was very small, and he went through them one by one with the speed of someone who no longer had the option of being wrong. And he arrived at a name that wasn't Harwick and wasn't Varga, and was in fact a name he had trusted longer and more completely than either of them. And the arrival of it was the worst thing the night had produced so far, which was a high bar, and he stood with it for exactly 2 seconds, the amount of time he could afford, before he put it away and made himself, the name was Marco. Damian understood it in the 2 seconds he allowed himself to stand with it, and then he put it in a place inside himself where he could carry it without letting it slow him down, which was a skill he'd learned young and used often and had never once stopped hating. 9 years. Marco had driven him, protected him, been present for the kind of moments that most people kept private because they were too small or too raw for an audience, and had been in Damian's orbit so completely that Damian had stopped seeing him the way you stop seeing furniture. Not absent, just incorporated, assumed, part of the architecture of the life. 9 years, and someone had offered Marco something larger than 9 years of loyalty could hold. He put it away. Harper. He was already moving toward the living room. Take Eli. Don't turn on any lights. She came out of the other room with Eli on her hip. The boy was half awake and clinging, his face pressed into her neck. And she looked at Damian's face and didn't ask any questions, which was the quality in her he had come to depend on in approximately 4 hours and didn't have time to examine. Back door, he said. Where does it go? Alley. Then the dry cleaner's loading dock. There's a door on the east side of the building. It'll be unlocked. Then what? He checked the borrowed weapon. Still 6 rounds. Stay in the building until I come for you. Don't open the door for anyone else. And if you don't come? He looked at her. There's a woman named Clara Reyes, he said. Detective Sergeant, Area 3. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call the police from the dry cleaner's landline and say her name. Tell them everything. Harper held his gaze for exactly 1 second. 30 minutes, she said. She went out the back. Damian turned off the remaining lights in the safe house and moved to the front window, staying below the frame, and looked down at North Paulina through the corner of the blackout curtain. The street was quiet, post-midnight quiet, the kind that had its own particular texture of parked cars and closed storefronts, and the yellow-orange wash of the streetlights on the wet pavement. 2 cars, one parked on the north side of the block, facing east, engine off but warm. He could see the slight shimmer of heat off the hood. One idling in the service lane across from the building entrance, lights killed. 4 men, minimum, probably 6. He had 6 rounds and whatever was in the kitchen. He went back to the kitchen. The first one came through the front door at 1:58 a.m. He came in fast and low with the weapon up, the way you come in when you've been told the target is trained, and you can't afford to give him the half second that means the difference between your gun and his, and the fast, low entry is the right move, tactically. It is absolutely the right move in every way except when the person you're coming in after is no longer in the room where you expected him. Damian came off the wall on his left side. The kitchen was dark. The only light was the street light coming through the alley window above the sink, and it was enough. It outlined the man's shape against the slightly lighter dark of the apartment, and Damian used the shape the way he'd learned to use everything, as information, as an edge, as the difference between going home and not. The fight lasted less time than the one in the restaurant kitchen because Damian was operating in a different register now. Not controlled emergency response, not the careful calibration of a man trying to limit the damage. This was something older and less considered. He put the man down and took his weapon and checked it and moved toward the front door in a single unbroken sequence. Second man was on the stairs. Coming up. Damian went toward him instead of away from him because going away was the option they expected. And in the half second of surprised recalibration, he had the angle, and he used it. And the second man went into the wall and then down the stairs, and Damian stepped over him and came out the front entrance onto North Paulina with both weapons and the specific internal temperature of a man who has gone past the point where the body asks permission. The car on the north side of the block reacted, a door opening, a figure coming out, and Damian was already moving laterally, using the parked cars as cover, cutting across the street diagonally toward the service lane where the second car sat, because the second car was the command position, the car with the radio and the phone, and the person who was running this from the outside. A shot hit the car door beside him, and glass came down on his shoulder, and he ducked between two parked vehicles and kept moving, using his elbows and the balls of his feet, staying below the vehicle rooflines in the way that his body remembered from 20 years of learning this through situations that had required it. He came up behind the service lane car from the east end, where the lane curved around the dry cleaner's loading dock. The driver saw him at the last second, got a hand on a weapon. Damian put the driver's side window between them with the butt of the borrowed gun, and the door came open and the driver came out sideways, and Damian got his arm across the man's throat and walked him backward into the brick wall of the dry cleaner and held him there until the resistance stopped. He got into the car. Ignition was running, radio on the seat, encrypted model, phone in the cup holders, the phone the driver had been using to coordinate. He looked at the last call. The number was Marco's. He sat in the idling car in the service lane for 3 seconds and felt the full weight of 9 years compress into something very small and very final. Then he picked up Marco's phone and dialed the number at the top of the call log, Marco's personal cell. And when it rang twice and connected, and Marco said carefully, "It's done?" Damian said nothing for a moment, just held the phone to his ear in the dark service lane with the sound of Marco's breathing on the other end. And Marco knew. He knew from the silence. Damian could hear it happen. The particular quality of a person understanding all at once that the thing they thought was over is not over, and the person they thought was dead is on the other end of the line. "Damian, how much?" Damian said. A long pause. "It doesn't matter what. How much?" The number Marco said was not a large number for the thing it had purchased, which was 9 years and the closest thing to trust that Damian's life had allowed him. But numbers, in Damian's experience, were rarely proportional to what they bought and what they cost. And this one was no exception. "Where are you?" Damian said. "I can explain." "Where?" Marco told him. The address came out in pieces with the particular quality of information given by someone who knows that withholding it is not going to save them and is choosing instead the version of this that ends without more pain, which was its own kind of courage and its own kind of cowardice simultaneously. It was an address on the west side. 20 minutes. Damian looked at his watch. 22 minutes since he'd sent Harper and Eli out the back. He got out of the car and went around to the dry cleaner's east door and knocked twice. The door opened in 6 seconds. Harper, with Eli pressed behind her, one hand behind her back resting on the boy like a tether. She looked at him, at the blood on his jacket collar, at the weapons. "It's been 22 minutes, she said. "I know. You said 30. I got ahead of schedule." She looked at him for one more moment with something that was not quite relief and not quite its opposite, and then she stepped back and let him in from the cold. He didn't take them back to the safe house. He drove north and west to a property in Logan Square that had no connection to his primary organization, a 2-flat he'd purchased under a personal trust 12 years ago for reasons that had been vague even then, some instinct about needing a space that existed entirely off the ledger. He'd kept it maintained and kept it empty and had used it twice in 12 years for reasons that had seemed like overcaution at the time. Overcaution, it turned out, was the only kind that mattered. He got Harper and Eli inside and into the upstairs unit, and he made sure the doors were locked and the windows were covered, and Eli was back on a couch with a blanket, and this time the boy stayed awake, sitting upright, his crayon drawing on his knee that he'd carried out of the safe house with the focused grip of a child who has decided some things are not negotiable. And he looked at Damian with dark, steady eyes that had too much in them for a 7-year-old face. "Are you hurt?" Eli said. "A little," Damian said. "Not badly." "Does it hurt?" "Eli," Harper said from the kitchen doorway. "He asked me something real," Damian said to her. He looked back at Eli. "Yeah, it hurts." Eli considered this with the serious precision of a child who was calibrating the relationship between honesty and trustworthiness. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded once and looked back down at his drawing. Damian went to the kitchen. Harper had found the cabinet where he'd stocked the unit, basic provisions, the staples. And she was running water in the sink, and she turned when he came in and looked at the jacket, at the blood on the collar. "Sit," she said. "Harper, sit down." He sat. She found the first aid kit in the same place it was in all his properties. He kept them consistent, a habit that extended to every operational detail, including the mundane ones. And she came around behind him and looked at the cut on the back of his neck where something had caught him during the service lane, a piece of glass or brick, and cleaned it with the same matter-of-fact efficiency as before. Her hands were steady. He'd noticed that about her from the beginning, the steadiness, not the absence of fear, the refusal to let fear make the decisions. "You found out who gave us up," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Someone close to you?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, cleaning the cut with careful strokes. "I'm sorry," she said. He didn't answer immediately because the word did something he hadn't expected, which was to locate a place beneath the operational part of his mind where the information about Marco had been stored without being processed, and to make the processing necessary and immediate. "It happens," he said finally. "That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She finished with the bandage and came around to face him and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, looking at him with that direct, stripped-down attention. "What's next?" she said. "I go to a warehouse on the west side. I deal with the man who took Varga's money to give up the safe house. And then tomorrow night I go to the riverfront and I end the war." "Alone?" "There are people I can trust, not many, but some." "Briggs?" He'd told her the name over the drive. He'd found himself telling her things during the drive. The Harwick information, the Winslow federal situation, the shape of what the next 24 hours required. Not because he planned to, but because she absorbed information like someone who was going to need to use it, and he'd been operating alone long enough that having someone absorb it was its own specific relief. Briggs and Clara Reyes, when the time comes. The detective. "She's been building towards something for 3 years. By tomorrow, she'll have enough to close it." Harper looked at her own hands. "And Kyle?" "He'll testify. Between what he has and what Briggs has built, Varga and Harwick are done before they reach a courtroom." "I don't want him testifying," she said. "I want to talk to him, before any of that." "You'll get that." She looked up at him. "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." A long pause. The city outside, distant and indifferent, doing what it always did. "Will Eli be safe here?" she said. "Yes. This property is completely off book. Nobody knows it exists." Nobody knew about the other one either. The accuracy of that landed without malice. She wasn't accusing him. She was stating the operational reality, which was that the definition of secure had just been revised in real time, and she was applying the revision. "Different architecture," he said. "This one is personal, not organizational. Nobody in the organization has ever—" He stopped. "Nobody has ever been here," she read the stop. "Not even Marco." "Not even Marco." She nodded. "Go do what you have to do," she said. "I'll be here." He stood, picked up the jacket, which was past the point of being useful as a jacket, but was still functional as a container for the weapons. "Harper." She looked at him. "After this is over," he said, and then stopped, because what came after that was not something he'd planned to say, and the unplanned version of it was more honest than anything he could have constructed deliberately, which meant it was more dangerous. After, she said. Just that. Making it a complete thought, a complete commitment, not to any particular outcome, but to the fact of an after existing. He went out into the 3 a.m. city. Marco was at the West Side address alone, which surprised Damian until it didn't. It was consistent with the particular quality of Marco's shame, which was not the aggressive, self-justifying shame of someone who had rationalized their betrayal into a grievance, but the smaller, quieter shame of a man who had made a transaction and was now sitting in the room with what the transaction had cost. He was at a kitchen table in a rented room above a laundromat with a glass of water in front of him that he hadn't touched, and his hands flat on the table. And when Damian came in through the door Marco had left unlocked, he looked up and met Damian's eyes and didn't look away. That took something. Damian acknowledged it to himself without letting it change what the next few minutes required. He sat across the table. He put both weapons on the table between them. Marco looked at them and then looked back at Damian. "How much did Varga have on you?" Damian said. Marco's jaw shifted. It wasn't Varga. Then who? Harwick. Damian was still. He had something from 4 years ago, Marco said. A situation that... He stopped, pressed his hands flat against the table. It doesn't matter what it was. He had it. And 6 weeks ago he came to me with it, and he gave me a choice. What choice? Information. Or exposure. He looked at the glass of water. I chose wrong. You gave him the safe house address. Tonight, yes. He said it was just location, that they'd pick you up clean. No. He stopped. He said the woman and the kid wouldn't be touched. Harwick told you that? Yes. And you believed him? Marco said nothing. The silence was its own answer. Not that he'd believed it exactly, but that he'd needed to believe it enough to proceed, which was a different and worse thing. Damian looked at the man across the table. 9 years of mornings and late nights and the particular intimacy of someone who'd been present for the moments that mattered. He looked at the cost of it and the fact of it and the 2 weapons on the table between them. Stand up, he said. Marco stood. Turn around. A beat. Then Marco turned around. Damian stood, picked up one of the weapons, and put the barrel against the back of Marco's skull. And the room was very quiet and Marco's breathing changed, went shallow and faster. And his hands came up very slightly from his sides in the posture of a man who is making himself hold still against everything his body is telling him to do. Damian held it there for 7 seconds. Then he lowered the weapon. You're going to call Clara Reyes, he said. You're going to tell her everything. Harwick, what he had on you, the 6 weeks, tonight, all of it. Marco turned slowly. His face was the color of old paper. If you run, Damian said, I'll know within an hour. And I won't send someone. I'll come myself. I know, Marco said. Make the call. He left Marco standing in the room above the laundromat with the phone in his hand and went back down to the street. And the night was cold and very clear now, the rain finally done, and the city spread out around him in its 3 a.m. version of itself. Stripped down, functional, honest about what it was without the performance daylight required. He had one more stop before dawn. Daniel Harwick's condominium on Erie Street had a lobby with a doorman and a camera system, and the particular security theater of expensive residential buildings that suggested safety without providing it to anyone who understood how these things actually worked. Damian walked past the building twice. Then he called Briggs. I need Harwick's unit number and his floor layout. 12, Briggs said. 1204. Corner unit, west side of the building. He's still there. I've been watching the building cameras remotely. How long before he moves? He got a call 40 minutes ago. Unknown number, brief. He's been packing since. So Varga had reached him. The failed operation, the dead men, the collapsed timeline, and Harwick's phone had lit up because people who build conspiracies together are connected at the points of failure just as they're connected at the points of execution. I need 10 minutes with him, Damian said. You go in there. I need 10 minutes. A pause. Then, Doorman's name is Felix. He's worked for me for 2 years. Go to the service entrance on the east side. Maintenance code is 4471. Elevator to 12. Turn left. He went in through the maintenance entrance and rode the service elevator to 12 and walked to the corner unit and knocked. Silence on the other side. Daniel, he said, not loudly. I know you're packing. I need 10 minutes and then you can call whoever you're planning to call. I won't stop you. A long pause, the sound of a deadbolt. Then the door opened. Daniel Harwick was 61 and silver-haired and had the face of a man whose primary professional skill was conveying trustworthiness, which was the face that had sold Damian 9 years of competent service, and the face that was now expressing something very complicated in a silk bathrobe at 4 a.m. His eyes went to the dried blood on Damian's collar and his packed suitcase sitting near the door and back to Damian's face. He stepped back. Damian came in. The apartment was the kind of apartment that cost money to look effortless. The art carefully placed, the kitchen with its professional appliances, the view of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the lights of pre-dawn Chicago in a way that was genuinely beautiful, which made it genuinely strange to be having this conversation in front of it. Harwick stood in the middle of his living room with his hands in his bathrobe pockets and the expression of a man who had rehearsed several versions of a conversation and was finding that all of them were wrong. You came to threaten me, he said. No, Damian said. I came to tell you what's already in motion. Harwick's eyes shifted slightly. The tell of a man recalibrating. Marco is talking to Clara Reyes right now, Damian said. Briggs has the full financial map, every transfer, every LLC structure, every account you touched going back 26 months. The FBI already has Kyle Winslow, who has 8 months of testimony about Varga's operation. And by 6 a.m., Reyes is going to have everything she needs to open a federal conspiracy case that names you and Varga and puts both of you away long enough that the number doesn't matter. Harwick said nothing. Vincent Caruso, Damian said. The name did what names do when they carry that much weight. It moved through the room and changed the air. I have the communication log, Damian said, 4 days before he died. Your number. Varga's burner. 2 messages. You can't prove. I don't have to prove it tonight. Damian took 3 steps closer to him, and Harwick held his ground with the specific courage of a man who knows running is not an option and has decided the least available dignity is to stay standing. I have to prove it in a courtroom, and I will. And you know what the evidentiary weight of those 2 messages is going to be in front of a federal jury along with the rest of what Briggs has built. Harwick's jaw tightened. What do you want? I want you to understand what's coming so that when it arrives, you know it was built the right way. Not a bullet in your kitchen. A case, a courtroom, every piece of evidence and every decision you made on a record. That's... Harwick almost laughed. The sound came out wrong. That's almost principled. It's practical, Damian said. You go in front of a judge. Varga goes in front of a judge. What happened to Vincent Caruso goes on record. He paused. And the woman and the child from the restaurant walk away from this completely. Harwick was looking at him with the particular expression of a man who is trying to find the angle and is not finding it. The kid, he said. The boy. 7 years old. His name is Eli. I didn't... He stopped. Started again. The original plan didn't include... I know what the original plan included, Damian said. I heard Varga's word for it. Protocol. He let that sit for a moment. You're going to want to think carefully about whether you're the kind of man who can carry that word and what it was attached to and make peace with it. Harwick looked at the floor. My attorney will contact Reyes in the morning, he said. The sentence had the flat quality of a decision that has been made all at once in the space between one breath and the next. Damian nodded. He turned toward the door. Moretti. He stopped but didn't turn around. He was going to do it to you anyway, Harwick said. Varga. Even if I hadn't, he would have found another way. Another attorney. He'd been planning it for 2 years. Damian stood with the door handle in his hand. I know, he said. That doesn't make it better. No, Damian said. It doesn't. He went out into the hallway and rode the service elevator back down and came out through the maintenance entrance into the pre-dawn Chicago street, and the city was just beginning its first gray conversation with the coming light. The delivery trucks and the early workers and the particular quality of 4:30 a.m. when the night people and the morning people briefly occupy the same city without quite seeing each other. He called Briggs. "It's tonight," he said. "The Riverfront Warehouse. I need everything you can put together by 8 p.m. "What's the play?" "We don't go in loud," Damian said. "We go in with a case. Everything. Harwick, the financial map, the Caruso log, the restaurant operation. We go in and we lay it out in front of Varga and every person he has left standing, and we give them the choice." "That's—" Briggs was quiet for a moment. "That's not how you've done things before." "No," Damian said. "It's not." What changed? Damian thought about a woman sitting at a table in a restaurant that was not built for her, with steady hands and a son who saved his drawings, and the particular brand of courage that has nothing to do with weapons and everything to do with choosing, every single day, to keep going anyway. "I'm done doing things the way I've done them," he said. "Set it up." He ended the call. He had 14 hours. He drove back to Logan Square through the lightning city, and he came up the stairs of the two-flat and found the upstairs unit's kitchen light on, and Harper at the table with 2 cups of coffee, and Eli asleep on the couch, with the crayon drawing finally released from his grip and spread flat across his chest, like something that had been carried long enough and could rest now. She looked at him when he came in, looked at the state of him, the jacket, the eye, the 4 a.m. exhaustion that had moved past adrenaline into the deeper, quieter register underneath. She pushed one of the cups across the table toward him. He sat down. He picked up the coffee. "It's tonight," he said. "I know," she said. "One more night. One more night." He looked at her across the kitchen table. This woman who had changed the entire direction of this by doing something as simple and as radical as refusing to let a stranger be publicly shamed on his birthday. And he thought that of all the things he had built and all the things he had cost and all the spaces that had stayed deliberately empty in the architecture of his life, this kitchen table at 4:30 in the morning was the most honest place he had been in. He slept for 4 hours on the couch in Logan Square with his jacket still on, and woke at 9 a.m. to the sound of Eli in the kitchen asking Harper if the man on the couch was dead. "No," Harper said. "He's very still. He's tired. Don't wake him." A pause. Then Eli's voice quieter. "Is he going to be okay?" Harper's answer took a moment, and in that moment Damian lay still with his eyes closed and listened to her decide what version of the truth to give. "I think so," she said. "I think he's going to be fine." It was not the unqualified yes she gave Eli about everything else, and the absence of it was its own kind of honesty, and Damian lay on the couch and felt it settle in him like something that had weight and warmth simultaneously. He sat up at 9:15. Eli was at the kitchen table with a glass of orange juice and his crayon drawing, which he had apparently decided needed additions. He was working at it with focused attention, adding something in blue to the corner, his tongue pressed to the upper lip in the expression of a child doing serious work. Harper handed Damian coffee without comment. He drank it standing at the kitchen counter and looked at the city through the window. October morning, hard light, the kind of clarity that comes after rain has washed everything and the sky hasn't yet decided what it wants to do next. "Briggs called," Harper said. "He has everything ready." "When did he call?" 7:30. "I answered your phone." She said it without apology, the way she did most things. "He said to tell you Reyes is briefed, and that Harwick's attorney made contact with the FBI at 6 a.m. Damian looked at her. "You talked to Briggs." He seemed surprised by that, too. She poured her own coffee. "He said Varga has 9 men at the warehouse, maybe 11. 9 is manageable. 11 is manageable? With the right architecture." She looked at him over her mug. "I want to be there." "Absolutely not." "Damian, you're not a tactical asset, Harper. You're the person I'm trying to keep away from the tactical situation. I'm not asking to go in with you. I'm asking to be there. Outside, when it's done." She set down her mug. You said I'd get to talk to Kyle. He'd forgotten he'd said that. Or not forgotten. Filed it in the category of things that were true, but belonged to the after, and the after had not yet arrived. Kyle isn't at the warehouse. I know. Briggs told me he's at the federal field office on Roosevelt. He's been there since last night. They pulled him in when the restaurant situation hit the wire. She held his gaze. I want to go there. After your warehouse. I want to see him. I'll take you. You'll take me yourself. Yes. She studied him for a moment. Okay, she said, and then she turned back to the stove where she'd apparently been making eggs, and the domesticity of it in the context of everything that surrounded it was so specific and so strange that Damian stood with his coffee and couldn't quite locate the right framework for it. Eli looked up from his drawing. I made the cake bigger, he said, showing it to Damian, because now it's both your birthdays. Damian looked at the drawing. The cake had indeed grown, purple and yellow with an ambitious new tier added in blue, and at the top, in the imprecise lettering of a 7-year-old, 2 sets of initials, EW and DM, separated by a small star. That's good work, Damian said. Eli seemed satisfied. He went back to it. Damian drank his coffee and looked at the drawing and thought about what it would mean to be a man who had his initials on a child's birthday cake, and what it would mean to be a man who didn't. And the distance between those two things, which had seemed like the full width of the world 48 hours ago, felt different now. Not small, but crossable. Briggs arrived at noon with a modified van and 2 men Damian trusted in the specific limited way that he trusted anyone. Not completely, but in the bounded, verified way of people who had been tested and had passed the test. Their names were Stein and Calloway, and they were not organization men. They were independent, which was the only category of person Damian felt confident about tonight. They went over the warehouse layout at the kitchen table while Harper kept Eli occupied in the other room with a card game she'd found in the closet, and the sound of Eli's voice explaining the rules with the authority of a child who invents rules as he goes. The Calumet River warehouse was a 3-bay commercial space that Varga had been using for 4 years as a secondary operations point. It sat on a private lot with river access and a single road in and out, which made it defensible and made it a trap simultaneously, depending on which side of the door you were on. Damian had been on both sides of doors like this. He knew which side was which. We go in at 8 p.m., he said, 2 hours after dark. Reyes has a team staged 4 blocks out. They come in on my signal, not before. If Varga goes for the river exit, Stein said, the riverside is covered. Reyes has a marine unit. And if he burns the building? He won't burn the building. He has $23 million in cash and assets at that location. Varga doesn't destroy his own money. He looked at the layout. He's going to try to negotiate. He'll think I'm coming in to execute him, and he'll try to negotiate because Lucien Varga has never once in 11 years accepted that a situation was unwinnable. That's his strength, and that's what ends him tonight. Briggs looked up from his laptop. The documents are packaged and uploaded. Reyes has digital copies. 3 separate federal contacts have physical copies in sealed envelopes. They open them at 9 p.m. regardless of what happens between now and then. Good. Damian. Briggs took off his glasses and looked at him with the stripped-down expression of a man who had spent his professional life reading situations and was reading this one carefully. What are you going to do when you're in the room with him? Damian looked at the warehouse layout, at the 3 bays and the river exit and the single road in and out. I'm going to give him the same thing I gave Harwick, he said, the full weight of what he built and what it's going to cost him. And I'm going to let the law finish it. Briggs held his gaze. And if he doesn't take that option, then I'll make the other decision. He said it flatly, without drama. But I want the first one on the table. He had 2 hours before dark, and he spent the first of them alone in the Logan Square 2-flat, while Harper and Eli were with Briggs in the van downstairs, and he sat in the kitchen with the city going about its afternoon business outside the window. And he did something he had not done in a very long time. He thought about what he wanted his life to look like. Not tactically, not operationally. The actual shape of the days, the texture of them, what would be in them, and what would not. He'd built an organization that had consumed the full available space of his existence for 20 years, and had told himself the consumption was the point, that men like him didn't have the other kind of life because the other kind of life didn't have room for men like him. He thought about a crayon drawing with his initials on it. He thought about a woman who had looked at him across a restaurant table and said something true without being asked to. He thought about what it would mean to be done. Genuinely done. Not the partial retirements that powerful men arranged for themselves where they kept the strings even after they'd given up the seat, but actually done. The thing removed from his hands and handed over to the law's accounting, and his own life returned to him as something he could use differently. It was possible. He understood, sitting in that kitchen, that it was actually possible, which was not something he'd believed at any previous point in his adult life, and the understanding of it had a quality he couldn't name. Too complicated to be simple relief, too grounded to be hope exactly, something in between that had more to do with Harper Winslow's steady hands and her son's drawing than with anything Damian had built or planned. He went downstairs at 6 p.m. The warehouse at 8 on an October night was exactly what it looked like from the layout. Industrial, lightless from the outside, the Calumet River black and quiet behind it, and the smell of it coming over the lot in the cold air. 3 vehicles in the gravel lot, lights visible through the high windows of Bay 2. Damian went in through the bay one loading door, which Briggs had confirmed was the access point Varga's people used least and watched least, and Stein and Calloway came in through the river access simultaneously. And the coordination of it was not elegant, but it was functional, and functional was what the night required. He moved through Bay 1 in the dark. Bay 2 was separated by a corrugated metal partition with a personnel door in the center, and through that door came the sound of voices, 3 or 4 of them, the low operational murmur of men waiting, and the smell of cigarette smoke and something hot, coffee or soup, and the particular human warmth of a space where people had been sitting for hours. He went through the door. The room resolved itself in the available light. Work lights on stands, casting the bay in a harsh industrial yellow that made everything look like evidence. 7 men, not 9. Varga had either moved 2 of them or Briggs's count had been off. 4 along the east wall, 2 near the river exit, 1 at a table in the center of the room with a phone and a radio and a posture of command. Lucien Varga looked up from the table. 11 years. 11 years of operational proximity, of shared decisions and shared meals and the particular knowledge that accumulates between men who work in close quarters on things that matter. And sitting across that distance now, Damian saw Varga with the clarity that only arrives after the framework of loyalty has been completely removed. He was 54, lean, with gray at his temples, and the careful grooming of a man who understood that appearance was its own communication. He had the eyes of a planner, always slightly ahead of the present moment, always calculating the 2 or 3 steps that the current move enabled or foreclosed. Damian had admired those eyes for a long time. He'd trusted the mind behind them. The 7 men in the room came to attention with varying degrees of speed when Damian came through the door, and hands moved toward weapons, and Damian held up the file in his left hand, a physical copy of Briggs's complete package, 3 inches thick, rubber-banded, and said, clearly and without volume, "Sit down." Nobody sat, but nobody drew either. Varga looked at the file, then at Damian. His expression moved through surprise and into something more considered, the rapid recalibration of a man who had expected one version of this night and was being presented with another. "You came alone," Varga said. "I came with the material," Damian said, setting the file on the nearest flat surface. "That's enough." Varga leaned back in his chair. The performance of ease. "You should have come with more men." "I don't need men. I need you to understand what's already in motion." Damian looked around the room. "All of you. Not just him." He had their attention. In his experience, men in rooms like this were not unconditionally loyal. They were conditionally committed, and the conditions included a reasonable expectation that the leadership structure they'd bet on was going to survive the night. He'd chosen his words to speak past Varga to the men behind him, and he watched the calculation run through the room like weather. "Daniel Harwick's attorney contacted the FBI this morning," Damian said. "Harwick is cooperating. He's providing the full financial architecture, Every account, every transfer, every entity that moved money over the last 26 months. He nodded at the file. What's in there is the same material. The FBI has digital copies. 3 federal contacts have physical copies in sealed envelopes that opened 45 minutes ago. Varga's face had gone very still. Vincent Caruso, Damian said. The name moved through the room. Varga said nothing. His jaw shifted just slightly and then went still. The communication log is in the file, Damian said. Your burner, Harwick's number. 4 days before Vincent died. 2 messages. He held Varga's gaze. That case is open as of tonight. It's not my case anymore. It belongs to the federal government and to the family of a 68-year-old man who retired and thought he was done and didn't get to be. Varga stood up slowly from the table. The men along the east wall watched him. You walked into a warehouse with 9 of my men, Varga said, to give me a file. I walked in with information, Damian said. The warehouse is the location. You're the audience. And what am I supposed to do with a file, Damian? Understand what it represents. Everything you built over 2 years, the financial structure, the shells, the Harwick arrangement, the restaurant operation, what you did to Vincent, what you tried to do to a woman and a child who had nothing to do with any of this. It's on record. It exists. It cannot be removed. He paused. I'm not here to execute you, Lucien. I'm here because I wanted to look at you while you understood that. Something moved through Varga's face. Not fear, not quite. Closer to the specific emotion of a man who has spent 2 years building a machine and has just been shown, in forensic detail, every place it failed. You went soft, Varga said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. A woman and a kid in a restaurant, and you went soft. I changed direction, Damian said. There's a difference. There's no difference. In this work, soft gets you killed. I'm standing in your warehouse, Damian said. You tell me which of us got it right. The silence in the room was the particular silence of a place where a decision is being made, not by the 2 men facing each other, but by the 6 men watching them, the men who had until this moment been committed to one outcome and were now performing real-time calculations about whether that commitment still made sense. Varga read the room. He was a planner. Reading rooms was what he did. Damian watched him read it. Outside, Varga said. Not to his men, to Damian. They went through the river exit into the cold. The dock, the black water, the far bank, a line of industrial dark against a sky that had clouded back over after the morning's clarity. The cold was immediate and serious, the kind that got into the joints and reminded the body of its limits. Varga stood with his back to the water and looked at Damian. How long do I have? He said. Reyes has a team 4 blocks out. She's waiting on my signal. And if I go into the river? Marine unit. Varga looked at the water. A long, quiet look. The kind a man takes when he's measuring the distance between where he is and where he thought he'd be. The Caruso thing, he said. That was before you and I... Don't, Damian said. I'm telling you. I know when it was. I have the dates. He kept his voice level. Don't explain it to me like an explanation changes what it is. Varga looked at him. Really looked. Not the strategic assessment he'd been running since Damian walked through the bay door, but something more direct and less calculated. You loved him, Varga said. He built everything I had, Damian said, and you and Harwick killed him so you could move faster. He paused. Say the rest of it. Whatever you're building to. I'm not building to anything. Varga's voice had lost the performance in it. What was underneath was something more tired and more real. The voice of a 54-year-old man standing on a dock in October at 8 p.m. with the full weight of his choices arranged around him. I'm looking at you and thinking that you came in here without trying to kill me, and I'm trying to understand what that is. It's a choice, Damian said. The same choice that was available to you when you decided to move against me. You chose one thing. I'm choosing another. The law. The word came out with a flat, exhausted irony. You're giving me to the law. I'm giving everything to the law, including myself. He held Varga's gaze. I'm done, Lucien. After tonight, I'm done with all of it. Because of the woman. Because of what I saw when I looked at my life from the outside. He paused. The woman showed me the outside. That's different. Varga looked at the water again. His shoulders had come down slightly from where they'd been in the warehouse. The descent of a man who has stopped holding a position and is simply standing. I won't beg, he said. I'm not asking you to. And I won't perform remorse for a courtroom. That's your choice to make. But the Caruso case, he stopped, pressed his lips together. His family. I need to know that the case stays clean, that it's the evidence and not, it's the evidence, Damian said. That's all it's ever going to be. Clara Reyes is clean. She runs a clean investigation. Varga nodded, once, the nod of a man completing a ledger. He turned toward the warehouse door. Lucien, Damian said. Varga stopped. The boy's name is Eli. He's 7 years old. He spent his mother's birthday on the floor of a restaurant because you put him there. He said it without rage, without heat, with the flat specificity of a fact being placed into the record. I needed you to hear his name. Varga stood with his back to Damian for a long moment. Then he went inside. Damian took out his phone and sent Clara Reyes a single word. Now. Maintenant. The next 40 minutes were the organized business of endings. Reyes's team coming in with the controlled efficiency of people who had been briefed thoroughly and were executing a plan rather than improvising one. The 7 men in the warehouse offering no resistance because the file had done what Damian had intended it to do, which was remove the rational basis for resistance before anyone had to prove it physically. Varga walked to the federal vehicle under his own power and got in without theater, and Damian watched him go with the specific feeling of watching something that had occupied a very large space in his life for a very long time finally exit it. Clara Reyes found him near the Bay 1 entrance. She was 47 and compact with close-cropped hair and the face of a woman who had spent 23 years making judgment calls in real time and had developed a very specific relationship with right and wrong that was more useful than most people's, even if it was harder to explain. She looked at him, at the state of him. You look like the last 3 days, she said. The last 3 days looked like this. She held out her hand. He shook it. The Caruso case, he said. That's the one that matters. I know. She looked at the federal vehicles. Harwick's material on that alone is going to take months to process. But it's there. Vincent deserved better. He did. She paused. You're going to have to come in. Not tonight, but soon. I know. You have... She chose her words. You have exposure on a lot of this, Damian. I can't protect you from all of it. I'm not asking you to protect me from any of it. He looked at the warehouse, at the lit bays and the activity inside them. I'm asking you to make the case correctly. Varga, Harwick, everything that connects back to Vincent. Make it correctly and let it go where it goes. She studied him. That includes you, she said. That includes me. She looked at him for a long moment with the look of a law enforcement officer who is encountering a situation that doesn't quite fit any existing framework and is deciding how to file it. I'll be in touch, she said. I know. He walked back to the van where Briggs was waiting and got in, and Briggs drove without being asked because the night had the quality of something that was over, and Briggs understood the acoustics of things that were over. Ishchat. The federal field office on Roosevelt Road was a building that looked exactly like what it was. Functional, institutional, the architecture of bureaucracy. They were waiting outside when the agent brought Kyle Winslow to the lobby. Harper saw him through the glass before the door opened. Damian watched her see him, watched the thing move through her. Not grief, not rage, not the relief of seeing someone alive who you weren't sure was something more complicated and more adult than any of those. The expression of a woman who has been carrying a weight she didn't know the full name of and has just been given the rest of the information. The door opened. Kyle Winslow was 36 and looked older, with the drawn quality of a man who had been living inside a federal arrangement for 8 months and had not slept well in all of them. He saw Harper and went still in the lobby entrance with both hands at his sides, and the expression of a man who has been rehearsing this moment and finding that the rehearsal was insufficient. Damian stepped back. He gave them the distance of the parking lot and stood near the van and didn't listen, only watched. The shape of the conversation, Harper's posture moving through its stages, the moment Kyle said something that made her turn away briefly and then turn back, the single time she put her hand flat against his chest, not affectionate and not aggressive, just the specific gesture of a woman establishing physical fact. Eli was in the van with Briggs, asleep again, the crayon drawing on his lap. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, Kyle Winslow went back inside and Harper walked across the parking lot to where Damian stood. She stopped next to him. She didn't say anything for a moment. The night was cold and clear and the city ran its usual business on Roosevelt Road, the headlights and the delivery trucks and the particular October chill that had not let up in 3 days. "He thought he was buying us time," she said. "That's what he said. He thought the federal process would move faster than it did, and that there'd be a resolution before anyone came for us." "He was wrong about the timeline," Damian said. "He was wrong about a lot of things." She pushed her hands into the pockets of her coat. "He's not a bad person." "No. He's just—" She stopped. "He made the choice that was most available to him, without asking me." She looked at the building where Kyle had gone back inside. That was always the thing. He made the choices without asking. Some people do that. "Do you?" He considered it honestly. "I have," he said. "I'm trying to do it differently." She looked at him. "I need to know something," she said. "Ask it." "What happens now, to you? Reyes said there's exposure. What does that mean?" "It means I have legal reckoning coming, not tonight, but coming. Things I did and things I built that I'm going to have to answer for." "Could you go to prison?" "It's possible." He said it directly because Harper Winslow did not get comfortable versions of facts. "It depends on how the case develops, what cooperation gets me, what Reyes can and can't insulate." She stood with this. "I'm not asking you to wait," he said. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I wanted to be clear about what the situation is." "Because you thought I deserved to know." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment in the parking lot light, and then she did something he hadn't expected. She reached out and straightened the collar of his ruined jacket, the simple physical gesture of a person who sees a small wrong thing and corrects it without making a ceremony of it. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." "You also said you didn't know if you were the kind of man who came back." "I wasn't sure then." "And now?" "Now I'm standing in a federal parking lot at 10 p.m. with a ruined jacket and a pending legal situation," he said, "and I'm still here." She let go of his collar. "Eli's going to ask about you," she said. "Tomorrow, and the day after. He's going to want to know where you are. Tell him I'm handling some things, that it takes time. And if it takes a long time, then tell him it takes a long time and that I'm still handling it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not going to lie to him." "I know, I'm not asking you to. And I'm not going to tell him things that I don't know are true. That's fair?" "So." She met his eyes. "Are they true?" "The things I'd need to tell him." He thought about what those things would be. Not the legal situation, not the exposure, not the months of reckoning that were coming, the other things, the things a 7-year-old would ask about and that a mother would need to answer truthfully. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. Just that. The same word she'd used in the safe house kitchen, carrying the same weight. Not unconditional, not naive, but grounded in something she'd decided was real and worth standing on. They drove back to Logan Square in the quiet of the late city. Harper in the passenger seat, Eli moved to the back with his head on her jacket, the drawing still in his hand, and Briggs at the wheel with the specific discretion of a man who understood his role in a moment that wasn't his. In the weeks that followed, the federal case took shape the way large cases do. Slowly, with the grinding procedural weight of evidence being processed and examined and entered into the architecture of legal accountability. Harwick cooperated fully, which meant the financial picture was complete and damning and left nothing outside the frame. Varga's 7 men in the warehouse had, to a man, decided that the file Damian had brought was sufficient argument for cooperation, which it was. The Caruso investigation was opened formally and would take months to prosecute and would, at its end, account for a 68-year-old man who had retired to Arizona and not gotten to finish. Damian's own legal situation resolved across 4 months of negotiation that Clara Reyes managed with the particular skill of a person operating at the edge of what the rules allowed in exchange for what the case needed. He gave testimony. He gave access. He gave the full organizational map that nobody in law enforcement had previously possessed in its complete form. And in exchange, he received something that was not immunity, but was less than what he'd been prepared for. Monitored release, substantial fines, 5 years of the kind of existence that had borders and reporting requirements and no travel outside them. 5 years. A room with borders. He'd been in a larger room with larger borders his whole life and had not known it until October 14th, when a woman had chosen to see him clearly and it had changed the direction of everything. But the bakery on the north side did not close. Carla, its owner, sold the building, but she sold it to a buyer whose offer came with a condition, which was that the bakery lease remain in place at its current rate for the next decade. The buyer was a real estate holding company whose beneficial owner was, through several layers of legitimate structure that Daniel Harwick had put in place before everything came apart, Damian Moretti. The structure was legal. It had been reviewed by 2 attorneys. It changed nothing about how the bakery operated and everything about the security beneath it. Harper found out in January when the new lease arrived. She called him. He was at the Logan Square 2 flat, which had become, in the intervening months, the place he lived in the way people live in places, with his things in it and his patterns worn into it and the particular shape of habitation that accumulates without being planned. "You bought the building," she said. "A holding company bought the building." "Damian, the lease is legitimate. You owe nothing to me. It's a commercial arrangement. It's you making sure I don't lose the bakery. It's a real estate investment with a 10-year commercial lease." A pause. He could hear the bakery behind her, the particular morning acoustic of a kitchen in production, the equipment and the movement, and the warm ambient noise of a place doing its work. "You're not going to let me argue with you about this," she said. "There's nothing to argue. The lease is in your name. The building is in a holding company. These are separate facts." Another pause. "Eli made you something," she said. "He's been making it for 2 weeks. He wants to bring it on Saturday." "Je pourrais toi." Bien. Saturday was his reporting day, the weekly check-in with his supervision officer that was the primary structural feature of his current existence. After the check-in, he had the rest of the day without requirements. "Saturday's fine," he said. "He's going to want to show you how the display cases work. He's been learning how everything works." "I'll look at the display cases." "He's also going to ask you a lot of questions." "I'll answer them." "He asks a lot of questions." "I know, I like that about him." A long pause. Through the phone, the bakery's warm morning noise. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he said. Woten. The following October, a year and 4 days from the night at Carver House, the bakery on the north side had the specific quality of a place that has found its version of itself and settled into it. The display cases were full. The smell of the bread reached the sidewalk and pulled people in the way that good things pull people. Not aggressively, not by performance, just by being genuinely what they were. Eli was 8 now, a full year's growth of it, with a new gap in his teeth from the one he'd lost in June and the specific confidence of a child who understood his territory. He knew every customer by name. He explained the pastry selection with an authority that made people smile the way children's authority always made people smile. At the confidence of it, and at the accuracy underneath the confidence. Damian arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week of October. He was wearing jeans and a jacket that was not a suit, and he came through the door of the bakery in the 3:30 lull between the lunch rush and the after-school wave, and the bell above the door announced him the way it announced everyone, without distinction. Eli looked up from the display case he was restocking. "You're early," he said. "I got finished early." Mom said 4 o'clock. I know what your mom said. Eli considered him with the clear-eyed assessment of a child who had learned to trust his own readings of people. Then he held out a croissant. We made these this morning. You should have one. Your mom made them. I helped. I did the fold-over part. Damian took the croissant. It was good, properly laminated, with the specific shattering quality of dough that had been given the time it needed. Not rushed, not cut short, given its full becoming. He said so. Eli looked satisfied in the deep way of people who are proud of work they actually did. Harper came out from the kitchen in her apron, with flour on her forearm and her hair pulled back in the way it always was when she was working. And she looked at Damian standing at the display case eating a croissant, and the expression that crossed her face was the one that had become familiar across the intervening year. Not the assessment of the first night, not the controlled steadiness of the safe house, something that had developed past both of those into something that had more room in it. You're early, she said. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. She untied her apron. Eli, can you handle the front for 10 minutes? Eli's expression indicated that he could handle the front indefinitely, and found the question slightly insulting to his demonstrated competence. They went to the small office at the back, barely room for a desk and 2 chairs, and Harper sat on the desk edge and looked at him. How was the check-in? She said. Fine. 2 more months and they reduce the frequency. That's good. Yeah. She looked at him the way she'd always looked at him, with the direct, undecorated attention that didn't ask permission and didn't perform. A year of it hadn't changed its quality. Eli wants to know if you're coming for his birthday, she said. When is it? November 12th. I'll be here? He wants to know if you can make it the whole day, not just dinner. She paused. He has specific ideas about what the whole day should look like. What kind of ideas? There's a list. It's 3 pages. She said it with the compressed amusement of a parent who has learned to love the specificity of a child's ambitions. One of the items is teaching him to play chess, which I'm told you know how to do. Where did he hear that? Briggs mentioned it once. Damian looked at her. Briggs talked to Eli about chess. Briggs has been coming in for coffee twice a week since August. He and Eli have a rapport. She said this as if it were simply a fact of the current world, which it apparently was. He also told Eli that you were the best tactical mind he'd ever encountered, which Eli has interpreted to mean you should teach him chess as a matter of priority. 3 pages, Damian said. Item 1 is the chess. Item 2 is teaching him how to read a room. She let that sit for a moment. I didn't ask where he'd heard that phrase. Damian looked at the desk surface, at the order forms and the vendor receipts and the ordinary paperwork of a small business doing its work. November 12th, he said. The whole day, she said. If you can. I can. She held his gaze. There's something I want to tell you, she said. I've been deciding whether to say it for about 3 months. Say it. She looked at her hands. Flowers still on the forearm, the strong, practical hands, the hands that had taped a butterfly bandage above his eye, in a safe-house kitchen on the worst night of the year. I don't need you to be more than you are, she said. I need you to be what you actually are, not what you think is appropriate, not what the situation calls for. She looked up. We've been careful, both of us. Very careful. Yes. I'm tired of being careful. The sentence sat in the small office, in the warmth of the bakery with the display case sounds coming through the partition and Eli's voice handling a customer with practiced authority. Damian looked at her. At this woman who had changed the entire direction of his life by doing something as simple as refusing to let him be humiliated in a lobby, who had stayed standing when everything collapsed, who had raised a son who made 3-page birthday lists and was proud of the fold-over part of a croissant. I'm not going to be an easy thing, he said. There's still 2 years of supervision, and before that... I know what before that is, she said. I've been here for the before that. Harper. I know who you are. She said it with the same certainty she brought to everything, not blind, not uncomplicated, but grounded in actual information. I've had a year to know who you are. I'm not making a decision based on the first night. I'm making it based on all the nights since. He looked at her for a long moment. I've been keeping this table, he said quietly, which was the phrase from the restaurant, the sentence he'd never gotten to finish on the night of the birthday dinner before the chandeliers came down and the world broke open, and she heard it and knew what it was, and her expression did the thing it did when she'd made a decision and wasn't going to revise it. Then stop keeping it, she said, and sit down. Outside the small office in the warm North Side bakery, Eli was explaining to a customer the difference between the morning croissants and the afternoon ones with the complete conviction of an 8-year-old who understood that some things required specificity. The customer was listening. The bread was good. The October afternoon ran its ordinary course through the windows, the city doing what cities do. Moving forward, replacing one thing with another, making room without asking whether there was any, finding that there always was. Inside, the two people in the back office stayed where they were, in the specific warmth of a place that had been kept and tended, and had become, without being declared, a place where broken things had been given enough time and enough honesty to become something else. Not repaired, not restored to what they were before. Something new, built from what survived, which is the only way anything good is ever built.